Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Flato, and I want to thank you all for joining us for this session in our 11th annual San Antonio Book Festival. Before I introduce our author, I want to thank our steadfast founding partner, the Central Library, and Ramiro Salazar and his amazing staff for all of their help and putting on the festival. Also, I want to thank Russell Hill Rogers Fund for their sponsorship of this venue, and to all of our sponsors who help let us put this festival on for free and keep it open to all. Thank you. Okay, we have a few procedural notes. This session is live streaming to the SABF YouTube channel, so please save yourself embarrassment and silence your cell phones right now. And remember, absolutely no flash photography. And please feel free to promote this event and our authors on social media by using the hashtag #SABookFest. If you'd like to ask a question, please wait and have it ready at the end of our conversation, and look for the volunteer with the microphone so that everyone will be able to hear your questions. At the end of our session, please head over to the Nowhere Bookshop tent, which is just back that way in the festival marketplace, to purchase your book and have it signed. Now, allow me to introduce Rebecca Makkai. Rebecca grew up in Lake Bluff, Illinois. Both of her parents are linguists, and she spent childhood summers traveling with them to academic conferences. Her Hungarian father is also a poet. Her paternal grandmother was a novelist, and there is supposedly a history of smuggling in the family. She graduated in English from Washington and Lee, and Rebecca holds an MA in Literature from Middlebury College's Breadloaf School of English. She was an elementary school Montessori teacher for 12 years before the publication of her first book. Makkai made her literary debut as a writer of short stories. She has published 4 other books, including the 2018 The Great Believers, about a group of friends grappling with the AIDS epidemic, which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, among many other awards, including being a finalist for the National Book Award, New York Times 10 Best Books of 2018, and lots of others. She teaches at the University of Nevada at Northwestern and is the artistic director of Story Studio Chicago. She is also very funny. We got to watch her do Worth Repeating last night, and it was really great. Today, she is here to talk about her latest novel, the literary page-turner, current New York Times bestseller, I Have Some Questions for You. Here's a quick blurb about this book that is better than anything I could have said to you, but the blurb goes like this. Both a deeply satisfying crime story and a thoughtful, even provocative novel of ideas, I Have Some Questions for You narrates one woman's interrogation of her own past, while in turn posing difficult questions directly to its reader about sex, power, privilege, and the ambient violence of contemporary American life. What a feat of storytelling. My little summation of the plot, for those of you who haven't read it, goes like this. Bodie Kane, a successful LA film producer and professor and producer of a hit podcast about Hollywood starlets, is invited back in January of 2018 to teach for 2 weeks at her New England boarding school, where 23 years earlier, her classmate and former roommate was murdered in their senior year. With her return to Granby, Bodie is forced to revisit the past and reevaluate traumatic memories of her troubled teenage self. Things get more complicated when one of her students becomes convinced that Omar Evans, a Black man who worked for the school as an athletic trainer, was wrongfully convicted of killing Thalia Keith and decides to make the murder case the subject of her class podcast. As Bodhi works, at first reluctantly but soon obsessively, with her students, another boy joins the podcast project, the messy and difficult issues of contemporary American life outside of the insulated world of Granby, issues of power, privilege, sex, gender, and race, filter in and are matched on campus. The more time Bodhi spends at the school, the more she struggles with what she remembers and knows about the case, wonders who to blame, questions the motives of her classmates, her professors, the school, and even herself. Please welcome Rebecca Makkai, who is going to begin by reading the prologue.
Oh, okay. Didn't realize I was reading this right away, but that sounds good. So yeah, actually, it's very funny. They don't let you call anything a prologue, because if you call it a prologue, everyone's going to skip it. So it does not say anything at the top of this page. It just is empty, and then chapter 1 starts afterwards. So it's not a prologue. You've heard of her, I say. A challenge, an assurance. To the woman on the neighboring hotel bar stool who's made the mistake of striking up a conversation. To the dentist who runs out of questions about my kids and asks what I've been up to myself. Sometimes they know her right away. Sometimes they say, wasn't that the one where the guy kept her in the basement? No, it was not. Wasn't it the one where she was stabbed in? No. The one where she got in a cab with different girl. The one where she went to the frat party. The one where he used a stick. The one where he used the hammer. The one where she picked him up from rehab and no. The one where he'd been watching her jog every day. The one where she made the mistake of telling him her period was late. The one with the uncle. Wait, the other one with the uncle? No, it was the one with the swimming pool. The one with the alcohol with her hair around, with the guy who confessed to, right, yes. They nod, comforted. By what? My barstool neighbor pulls the celery from her Bloody Mary, crunches down. My dentist asks me to rinse. They work her name in their mouths, their memories. I definitely know that one, they say. That one, because what is she now but a story? A story to know or not know. A story with a limited set of details. A story to master by memorizing maps and timelines. The one from the boarding school, they say. I remember the one from the video. You knew her? She's the one whose photo pops up if you search New Hampshire murder, alongside mug shots from the meth-addled tragedies of more recent years. One photo, her laughing with her mouth but not her eyes, suggesting some deep unhappiness, tends to feature in clickbait. It's just a cropped shot of the tennis team from yearbook. If you knew Thalia, it's easy to see that she wasn't actually upset, was simply smiling for the camera when she didn't feel like it. It was the story that got told and retold. It was the one where she was young enough and white enough and pretty enough and rich enough that people paid attention. It was the one where we were all young enough to think someone smarter had the answers. Maybe it was the one we got wrong. Maybe it was the one we all, collectively, each bearing only the weight of a feather, got wrong. So that was not the prologue.
Maybe it was the one we got wrong. Maybe it was the one we all collectively, each bearing only the weight of a feather, got wrong. So this prologue perfectly prepares the reader for a main theme coursing through the novel, and that is the role of memory and its fallibility. And not just that we forget things like, where had I kept that memory all these years, but also teenage memory, like the memory of Bodhi as a teenager versus Bodhi returning to campus as an adult with all the knowledge she now has that she can put that memory in perspective. And so many of our unreliable brains. I would love for you to talk more about the role of memory in your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I needed to choose very early on whether this narrative would jump around in time or whether we would stay stuck in the present. Because I couldn't, and I have. The Great Believers, my last book, it jumped back and forth between two times. So I could have had, 1995 at the top of the page, and we're there. There were several reasons I didn't want to do that, partly because this really was about looking back and, in real life, you are stuck in the present. And everything you know about yourself and your life, it's all memory. And I wanted to, deal with that on a very real level, and also what's lost to time, what can we not ever really remember. I then, I had the issue, if we're going to stay stuck in the present, of how do I get the past across? Not only, so this is, I just have a lot of backstory to get in there, all these things that happened. How do I get that across without just dumping memory on you in chapter 2? Or doing the thing, I have a little bit of a pet peeve with some fiction. It has this, someone will be like, watering their garden, and they have a memory, and it's like 15 pages of complete chronological order of something that happened in 1955, just like the wind was blowing this way, and then I scratched my nose. Really? And it's funny, I think it's something that fiction has borrowed from film, actually, in more recent years, because film has to do that. You get kind of blurry screen or whatever, and then you're there. Fiction didn't used to do that until people started, I think, kind of lazily sometimes borrowing it from film. I needed to have memories, but I didn't want to lie about how memory works. So I needed to find a way to, have it both ways. And my solution to all of that was, I'm not going to be able to solve this problem, but I can write about memory, and I can make it a book about memory and its failures, its inconsistencies, its contradictions. And that, that ended up being, of course, central to the story, to that question of this thing happened, nearly 30 years ago. Only a couple of people actually were there, but we all have these memories around it. And what can we figure out collectively? Is a collective memory better or worse than an individual memory? And there are two cases in this book where it's worse and cases where it's better, actually.
So the setting of this book, as we mentioned before, is on a boarding school in New Hampshire. It's a fictional boarding school, and it's secluded in the woods And with its insulated campus, its deep traditions, privileged and not as privileged students, academic and athletic excellence, and the whole in loco parentis model, it turns out that Granby itself is an ever-present character. And I'm not sure if everyone in the audience is aware that you went to a Midwestern boarding school as a day student. You and your family live at that same boarding school today. And how did that happen? And was it inevitable that you would write a novel about the culture and life that's all around you today and that you have experienced?
Yeah. So here's what happened. I was a scholarship day student at a school that was kind of half boarding and half day near Chicago. And I left. I went to college. I went to graduate school. I met my husband. We got married. We lived in Baltimore. And I had a job offer back in Chicago. And he was teaching high school English. It's what he does for a living. And I convinced him we should move back for 3 years. And I can do this job. And so he was applying to schools around Chicago. And the best job offer he got was at my old high school. 3 years has somehow become 21 years. We're still there. My daughter is a freshman now. But when you teach at a boarding school, as my husband does, most often you live on campus. There's campus housing, and it's in exchange for, being on call one night a week, things like that. So that's the situation. We've lived there. whatever you're imagining, whatever you're picturing right now, you are overestimating my involvement. I do not talk to the students. I don't know the students. They don't know me. They have no idea who I am. I have not observed them. I don't know them. We just live there. So I did filled in someone's maternity leave once. My daughter, now that she's a freshman, I know her friends. They were our babysitters, which was great. But people start to picture like the facts of life and people like living in it's nothing like that. But it is a fascinating environment. I find it almost more fascinating on the faculty side, that you essentially have this weird little gated community of people who live together and raise their kids together. It's a really interesting world. But it's also, I think people are fascinated by that environment. Some people want to read about it because they did go to a boarding school. Other people want to read about it because they didn't go to a boarding school. And there's this kind of mysterious thing to it, right? But it is a hothouse environment, and I'm always looking for those in my fiction. It is a kind of petri dish. And the same way a college is, but this is high school. You're younger, you're more information. And you don't know yourself as well yet. So being away from home is a little bit different. So I was always going to write a boarding school novel at some point in my life. People would always ask when I was going to. And my original answer was I would write it on my deathbed so that no one thinks it's about them. So people do this amazing job of thinking, no matter what you write, someone's going to think it's about them. But I had, a compelling enough idea for this book that I wanted to do it now. I just, we live in Chicago. I set it in New Hampshire. I made it a big skiing school. We don't have skiing schools in Chicago. I did everything I could to make it different. And people have understood that really well, fortunately.
What was your compelling idea for the story?
Well, right. It wasn't one idea, of course, right? And it's hard because, when people, that I think, but you get people sometimes who really want you to be like, what was the one moment of sudden inspiration where you suddenly decided to write this entire book? It's like, well, it's not quite like that. And if an author tells you that it was, they're probably polishing it a little to make it more interesting for the audience. But I was thinking a lot about true crime and our very strange relationship with it, which is nothing new. There's a lot of new media around true crime, podcasts and websites and Netflix specials, so that you could spend all weekend delving into a certain case and be looking at the photos of the house or whatever, right? But our interest as humans in true crime, they literally sold souvenirs outside the Lindbergh baby murder trial. Like, this is nothing new. But then why, right? Is it evolutionary? What is it that makes us really want to, and really like almost panicking when we can't figure out what happened here, like desperate to know? I was thinking about that a lot, and thinking about, just the idea of taking one of those cases that does become almost public property, that does become this object of complete fascination, speculation online, for any number of reasons. And you can think about that for yourself too, like as whether or not you consider yourself to be into true crime, which is a strange way to put it. There are certain cases that you just latch onto, right? That you know stuff about, or you're gonna click on that article if it comes up, and others that you don't. And then why those? But I wanted to take one of those cases that really, like, everyone thinks within the world of this book that they know, and then look at it through a realist lens. This is not, it's a murder mystery in that by the end, you know who did it. So I'm not going to do that to you and like do this whole thing and be like, we'll never know, and that's the message of the book. But other than that, and that's realist too, but it is hyper-realist, from the legal system to the carceral system to what pressures would be on the police. Like, you want to talk about that story, let's actually talk about it. That whole ball of wax and the boarding school thing, they came together for me because they were both about looking back. They're both fundamentally about looking back and trying to make sense of what already happened. And, you know, all of us are always looking back at high school and trying to make sense of what happened in some way, right? But just very dramatically in this case.
Yes, I have been guilty of following some of those true crime things myself.
The Murdaugh thing in South Carolina,
Oh
I will watch anything related to them. It's like, what? But I mean, it's a weird one. Like so many, there's good that's actually come out of that attention. Because if that case had stayed local, they already had they had that court system under their thumb. It's the public attention. There's also, I'm sure, bad stuff that's come out of that, re-traumatizing people. But it's one of those just tailor-made for everybody to be so, like you could dig forever and find new things and go, oh, but did you hear about this part? Did you know? Yeah, and yeah.
Our daughter was, one of our daughters was a student at the University of Virginia when a classmate of hers went missing, and of course we didn't know for weeks and weeks and weeks what happened to her. But I will, as an aside, say that and of course you're just grieving for the whole community and her parents, but ever after that, because when your kids are all off at school, you just depend on them text messaging you back or calling, and sometimes they don't respond, and so sometimes clever parents say things like, "Are you alive?" And I never, ever, ever said that again after that thing happened on our campus, and because I know that mom probably had done that herself. Sorry, I didn't. That was an aside, but I know you called this novel a literary feminist boarding school murder, and we've talked a little about some of that stuff, but let's talk about the feminist part of it.
Well, I mean, feminist in that, it's not like I got, action plans of of political things or anything in there. It's just, this is someone, my narrator is a woman, and she's thinking a lot about, the kinds of things, first of all, in the prologue that I just read you, the idea of this kind of, systemic and individual violence against women. I was also writing this I started writing the book in 2019, and the first 2/3 are set in 2018, which is right within that first wave of Me Too thinking. And it's a time when I think all of us, everyone, was looking back. And again, it's that looking back and trying to make sense, right? Looking back, and what surprised me about Me Too is that we weren't just looking back at kind of the big things, but it was those little, hallway harassment or microaggressions, that death by 1,000 cuts kind of behavior, that people were looking back and talking about as well. And that was on my mind, looking back on high school, on college. It would have been on this character's mind as well, and so it is. But it's messy, so she's, on the one hand, looking back and really thinking about holding people accountable, whether it was for, not going to track people down for the tiny things, but really thinking about them, holding someone maybe, if the wrong person is in prison, who should be held accountable. But then while she's there during these 2 weeks that she's on campus, her ex-husband is Me Too'd online. And it's for something that Bodhi, my character, does not feel crosses that line. For all of us, there were those kind of marginal cases where you're like, well, for a lot of people, it was Aziz Ansari early on, right? There was this sort of essay about him, and a lot of people went, wait, this isn't quite, I don't want to be a bad feminist here, but is this the same thing? And they weren't very productive conversations to have on Twitter. You need more space than that to think about it. But it's that kind of thing where she feels like, wait, this is different. So it's not, this is not a book that comes down and makes a certain statement. This is a book that contradicts itself because real life does that. It's more that we're mucking around in this tar pit together in this book of asking those questions. What does that mean? What does it mean to hold someone accountable for their past actions? What does it mean as a woman to have stood by and, awkwardly laughed at someone's really horrible sexist joke? All those questions, and very few answers, but that's literature for you.
The scene of Bodhi responding on Twitter to the criticism of her husband. I guess they're divorced at this point, separated, but they're friends and they share the children, and of her, deciding that yes, she was going to respond and defend her husband, but she's been soaking in the bathtub, and she's also been out with her friends and had a lot to drink, and her fingers aren't working properly, and so it comes back to haunt her that there were some things that didn't go right, but she felt that she had to. The internet shaming was just, it was over the top, wouldn't. I think any of us reading it would agree that it did not add up to the real terrible things that were happening out in the world, and it was a thing where it just got like a snowball.
Here's something interesting that I've discovered is that readers over the age of about 30 almost all say, yeah, he didn't do anything wrong. This is one of those cases. Readers under 30 are like, yeah, I can't believe she defended him. He did these terrible, terrible things. It's like, oh, okay. Like, there's a different generational difference there. And of course, I'm not, saying one or the other. It's, the character's actions, but there's a really interesting generation gap there.
Believe me, I have felt that with my own kids many times. Well, I think going back to the idea of Bodhi having the opportunity to, reassess some things that happened to her when she was a student at Granby. One of the characters who all of these themes come together for us is the memory, the culture, the predation, the power. Are with the character who is first introduced to us directly as you. And it sets up this incredible mystery and tension, and that character turns out to be Mr. Block, who is who started out with us thinking that he was one of the best things about Granby, because he was the music director and Bodhi was in theater, but while she's there, he gets recast as a creeper, was how one of her friends described him. And it made her, it's that exact opportunity that you described where something clicks in your memory and you all of a sudden see things differently. And tell about Mr. Block.
Yeah, so the whole book, it's not that there's this constant you. It's not like a choose your own adventure book where you is the main character or anything, right? But there's the idea of the narration here is that this book is sort of thought at this guy. In the same way that, you might, if someone's really on your mind, you might imagine that you're talking to them, right? Or that they're watching what you do. And so when she steps back on campus, this is the guy who, for whatever reason, is on her mind, and probably something subconscious going on there with, things she maybe knew deep down weren't right. But yeah, this was the guy who was very close to the students in this wonderful way in the 90s. And then you look back and go, wait a second, that wasn't wonderful at all. And why were you spending so much time with the students? He's also someone, and the reason, and I'm not giving away too much here, this is all very early in the book. He's someone that the students would gossip about, that he was having a relationship with Thalia, the young woman who ends up dead. And that later, Bodhi looks back and goes, oh, that was silly. Of course that wasn't true. But as she's back on campus, starts thinking, well, wait, maybe it was. And if that was the case, he should have been investigated. And he really wasn't. Whether or not he had anything to do with this, they probably should have talked to him. That, I think, for many of us, as I was writing this, just for fun, not to use their ideas, but I kind of just for vibes, asked a lot of people, what was the most scandalous thing that happened at your high school? Would also be a fun way to start any book club about this book, right? That, and I hope, I've been telling people that if they book club my book, I hope they make everyone bring their yearbook to the book club, especially if it's like multi-generational. Wouldn't it be fun? So many people, there was something with a relationship between a teacher and a student, or something in that realm, looking back, especially if you're talking about the 90s or earlier. And way back, it was like not even against the rules, like in the 1950s, and then the girl would marry her English teacher, and isn't that great? And later on became, was understood as very problematic, but was still happening. And did happen at my high school. And, you look back and you go, oh my God, not only what was happening, but also why did we not say anything? Because, and this is something Bodhi's grappling with too, there were these rumors, all of these things were going on, and no one dreamed of saying anything. Not, about that, but also about, things that were done to them. I mean, very, very, very problematic things. I think that has changed with time, but I think there is still something about being an adolescent and thinking, well, this must be what it's like to be an adult. You know these things, you have these secrets, and you're supposed to be okay with them. And hopefully hopefully that's changing, but.
You mentioned that Mr. Block should have been interviewed. Obviously, the police never even spoke to him, and possibly he was closer to Thalia Keith than he should have been. And this leads to the idea of, and it was clear you did a lot of research about the law and criminal justice system. And I'm curious about your process for integrating all of that into your story and developing the character, especially this character, Omar Evans, who really in the end of this book, and I'm not giving anything away, it's about two lives that were lost, Thalia Keith and Omar Evans, who's been in jail for 20-something years at this point. So I'm not a lawyer, and as I said earlier, I really wanted the realist take on all of this. To this extent that you want a lawyer reading it to, not roll their eyes, but also because you don't want to misrepresent what people go through in the justice system. So I was able to work with a woman who was a public defender in New Hampshire. Is it specific to New Hampshire law, right? You can't just research some other state, and was able to help me with, all kinds of things, incredibly helpful also with the New Hampshire carceral system, because in the middle of COVID, my chances of getting inside the New Hampshire State Prison for Men were slim. But she was, she could speak with authority about what that was like and the details of incarceration. And I was able to talk to some incarcerated people, formerly incarcerated people as well. I learned a lot in that research. You worry when you start to research, you have this idea and then you start asking questions and you realize that your idea is completely implausible. And you're like, oh, I wish, I wanted to do that. I can't do that. But what ends up happening is that 1,000 other doors open instead, because you start to see these possibilities, these, little plot points that would be usable. So I'm very, very grateful to that woman in particular. But it's, I'm always telling my writing students how much research is involved
in fiction writing. If you want to get things right, places or occupations or experiences or identities, you can have a lot of research to do.
Thank you. I'm going to ask just a couple more questions, and you all are all getting prepared with your questions, correct?
Are we, is that right on the time? We got 10 minutes? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So there is so much, Rebecca tackles so many serious themes, but I also want you to know that the writing is so beautiful, and there's so much character development, and there's also just a ton of humor. It sounds a little heavy what we're talking about, but some of the funny, I still laugh at some of your lines, which I'll let you all discover, but I just wanted to let you know that. I do want to ask Rebecca what it was like growing up in such a literary family.
Yeah. It's funny because literary wouldn't have been the way I thought of it as a kid at all. I just, my parents were both linguistics professors. Linguistics does not mean necessarily that you're into literature, right? There are a lot of different branches of linguistics. Like my mother's was like child language development, so much more of an academic family than a literary family. But my father was also a poet, and so there's that was going on as well. But no, it's I think that any kid who grows up in a house where they have books and books are read to them, that is enough, to spark a love of reading and perhaps a love of writing. The media difference, again, I wouldn't necessarily call it literary, but with my parents would be that my father in particular could just go off about the history of any individual word, or, and just, 45-minute monologue about the history of this word. And he spoke 16 languages, just all these, right? So it's funny because it actually allowed me to take language for granted in a strange way. That was so constant around me that I didn't have this moment of falling in love with words, because it was just everywhere. But obviously that happened as well. Yeah.
Are you ready? Do you all have some questions? If hands don't go up, okay, there we go.
Thank you for coming. This was one of my favorite books of the year.
Thank you.
So it's hard to ask questions about mysteries, right?
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of people who haven't read it yet.
We can be cryptic.
I'm going to be super cryptic. So my daughter read it first, and about halfway through the book, I was on the phone with her, and I'm like, I think I know who did it. And she said, tell me who you think it is. I was like, nope, I'm going to wait till the end.
Yeah.
And one of the things you do in the book is you take all the prime suspects and you do little scenarios of how they might have carried out the murder. But my person who I thought carried out the murder was none of those primes.
Yeah.
I was 100% convinced that you had dropped these red herrings about this very tangential the person.
Did do that.
And my question is, did you do that deliberately, or was I just totally reading
that?
Nope,
I did. Okay. And if you find me later in the signing line, you have to tell me who you thought it was. Okay. Yeah, there are a couple of other, there are the people that everyone, has suspicions about. There are the people Bodhi has suspicions about, and those are kind of really laid out. But I also wanted to drop a few little things about a couple other characters, so that the reader, who's looking for the least likely persons, how we read mysteries, might be like, oh, it's possible that he or she, and so yes, those were intentional. Sorry. And yeah, I don't think we gave anything away there, though. I think we're good.
Anyone else have a question? I think we should ask, what is your next project?
Yeah, I can. I'm going to be cryptic about that as well. But I'll say first, I'll say I have a story coming out in the New Yorker in a couple weeks. So if you want more very soon, you can look for that. Has nothing to do with this book whatsoever. It's completely different. But the thing that I'm writing right now, what I'll tell you is that it's about Germany in the 1930s, but it is not a Holocaust novel and it is not a World War II novel. It is about complicity in some ways, which I think is really important to be thinking about in general and right now. And I've been lucky enough to be able to travel over there for research last fall, which was really exciting. So very research heavy book. Lord help me. That's what I'm doing.
Well, complicity is a big theme in this book as well, because a lot of the, like we were talking about, Mr. Block should have been interviewed and he wasn't. Well, there are a lot of people who knew things who didn't say anything.
Right.
And then they were also influenced by the power of the school. And the school from the very beginning told the police, you don't need to interview any teachers or any, what's the other one?
Yeah, they didn't tell them not to, but you have, this actually does have, you have a state the size of New Hampshire. The endowment of an individual well-funded boarding school is practically equal to or greater than the GDP of the state, which is one of the reasons I said it there instead of, say, Massachusetts. And so, the power that school would have over the local police, over the state police is enormous. And just, subtly implying, well, of course, the students were all back in their dorm rooms. The teachers were all, no, of course it wasn't them. And then the state comes up with a suspect that everyone's sort of okay with. And I'm not saying he didn't do it necessarily, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, but the investigation was done very quickly. And yeah, the complicity of, I was thinking about, the systems that you're part of, whether you want to be or not. Bodhi, she's part of this school, even though she feels like an outsider. She's part of the patriarchy, even though she's also one of its victims. She's part of the institution of whiteness. We're all part of the carceral system, whether or not you know anyone incarcerated. And that's a dawning set of realizations for her, involving her own responsibility and her own complicity as well.
And I think that's one of the reasons why she feels so compelled and obsessed to right this wrong, if it's a wrong, because she really did consider herself an outsider as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so, the spotlight went on this young black man who was not a student, he wasn't a teacher, and they all just thought, that made sense until it didn't. Any other questions, you guys? Yes.
There's one back there.
Jeffrey. He's our.
So this is more about the craft of writing, and just to let you know, I've not yet read. I have some questions for you, but I certainly will. I was blown away by Great Believers.
Thank you.
For lots of reasons. And I'm imagining something here, and so the answer to my question might be very brief. But it seems to me like in Great Believers, you did a masterful job of being inside of a situation and a lot of characters that do not have a lot of Venn diagram overlap with you personally.
Right.
And then as I'm hearing you talk about and questions about, I have some questions for you, I'm imagining that there was more of that opportunity. And as a writer in the craft, did it feel like that? And did you then maybe, I'm imagining some sort of different gymnastic.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way you phrased that. Right. You're coming off of one book, and whatever you just did, you feel like, oh, I need to do the opposite now. I want to take a break from that. Not that you disavow it, just like I just ran that particular marathon and do some yoga instead, right? And so yeah, for the Great Believers was very research heavy. It's about the AIDS epidemic in Chicago in the 80s. There was medical research, there was historical research, all of that, interviewing people. There was also really writing across difference and putting myself in shoes that I've never been in. And so as I was looking at kind of competing ideas for my next project, the idea of, okay, if I write the boarding school novel next, I can be writing much more from personal authority, write about someone much more like me. It will be different in other ways, and difficult rather, in other ways, but I won't have to do as much research. And of course, ended up with the legal research, but it was nothing compared to The Great Believers. I'll be writing much closer, to my own identity, if not my own personality. So it was sort of like, just stepping in a different direction. And now, of course, the next project is super research heavy, very much not me, et cetera, et cetera. If you're writing a novel, you're going to be writing across difference for some characters at least, right? Whether that's gender or something else or just occupation. And you're also always going to be writing about yourself, even when you are writing about characters very, very different from you. There's, Yale Tishman, the main character of The Great Believers, is probably the closest character I've written to my own personality. I have the most just core in common with him. But and that was important to me, that I had that connection when there was so much else that was outside of my experience. So you're always doing both, but in different measures. And if you had to look ahead and understand all the work you'd have to do to write that entire novel, all of the research, all of the leaps, all that, you'd never do it. So you have to, every single time, I'm like, the next novel I'm going to write is going to be easy. It's going to be short, and it's going to be really simple, and it's going to be, and then not at all. But I tell myself that it helps.
Well, I think that's it. Let's thank Rebecca Makkai very much for coming today. Thank you all for being with us. Please make sure you go buy lots of copies of books, of Rebecca's book, and Nowhere Bookstore, and
I'm
she'll be signing.
I'm signing in the signing. Is there one signing tent?
The bookstore's there, and then we're going to walk you to the
Okay, well, I'm just trying to tell them where to go. I'll be signing books.